Hello and welcome to Video Revealed. I'm Colin Smith. Shout out to Ericor Case and Bound to Simple Simon, who asked for a deep dive in Adobe Illustrator. All right, Illustrator is the oldest Adobe application and has gone through quite a few changes over the years. It has some gotchas that trip people up. I want to talk about those gotchas, some best practices that I always use, and then basically why would you use this application instead of Photoshop or something else? To me, it is the quintessential application for everything object-based or vector-based. Even if I'm doing something for video, animation, or a title that's a little bit more complex than a title can create, I will always jump into Adobe Illustrator. If I need to draw diagrams, especially things like logos. I want to show you not the pen tool. I've got another tutorial up here that I'll show you. If you want to go learn how to use the pen tool, you can use that. I want to show you how you can use simple shapes inside Illustrator to get some designs done. I'm not trying to draw an object, a known object. We're trying to create simple shapes, but I also, as I mentioned, I want to show you all those little gotchas. Okay, so let's go start and create a new document in Illustrator. And because most of what I do is video based, I'm always working in pixels, 1920 by 1080. Of course, it can be almost up to 20 feet by 20 feet. And I twirl this advanced down and choose RGB and 300 pixels per inch. I've just found that when those are the default settings, if I do bring something that I created here over to Premiere Pro, it just tends to look better with 300 pixel per inch on your FX raster. If this goes out to print, then it's still a good setting. If it goes into After Effects, it's still fine. You can change this document setting at any time without any problems at all. It will never affect the artwork. So, okay, and we open it up. Now here we have our document, which is our 16 by 9 aspect ratio. And I'll just give you a quick tour of the useful tools in here. This is the selection tool. And if you click under here, there's a direct select and a group selection too. So right off the bat, you're thinking, there's 3 selection tools? Oy, already this is complicated. There's a reason for this. I'll get into it in a moment. But basically, I go between the select and the direct selection tool, never the group selection tool. The rest of these I don't care about. Like I said, I'm not going to be showing the pen tool or type or anything like that. I will be using these shapes. Illustrator does have another useful technique, and that's this little tear off panel here. If you click on that, you can tear that panel off. So I'm going to tear my shapes off. And from the left, it's a rectangle, a rounded rectangle, ellipse, a polygon, star tool, and a crazy flare tool. This flare tool isn't very useful. It's almost like the typical bad Photoshop After Effects flare, but it's an object. Don't worry about that. The rest of these, I'm not going to care too much about. Some of these, like the rotate and scale tool, I'll be using with keyboard shortcuts, so I won't be actually grabbing these tools. This one is essential, this shape builder tool. Just a little bit of history. Illustrator forced you to draw everything by hand, and then there became these Pathfinder tools, which we'll get into in a second. And then the Pathfinder tools were great, but they were global tools. Sometimes you needed a surgical tool to build shapes. And I love this tool. I live in this tool. I'll show you that in a sec. Forget the rest of these right now. We're going to go past them. Now down here, this slice tool, you might think that this looks like a slice tool to slice vector. It's not. It's about creating slices in old web pages when you had to manually slice things up. Yikes, we don't use that at all. This is the artboard tool where you can change the size of the artboard, you can move the artboard, you can duplicate the artboard. There's a bunch of defaults in here that you can choose. You can't get away with not using this. You have to use an artboard. I don't create multiple designs and output assets. So I basically just work with one artboard, but you have to have an artboard. Okay, so let's just talk about some of the gotchas in Illustrator. I'm going to create a few shapes. If you click and drag, you'll create a shape. If you click, you'll get a dialog box. And by the way, it shows you the exact size of the previous rectangle. So if I click again, it's going to make another one each time. So each time these are rectangle tools, or rectangle shapes that have been made. Now I'm going over to this tool, which is the selection tool. This is the typical move tool with the letter V on a North American keyboard for selecting these. And if you click on them and select them, you're moving them around. Now I'll show you the first gotcha. I'm going to go to my fill color and make no fill, and now I'll try to click in the middle. And you see I can't. That's because Illustrator is incredibly specific about what you can select and what you can't select. This looks almost the same, but it's not. It's not a white fill and a black stroke. It's no fill, black stroke. You can actually see that here. These strokes are showing through. But if you also go to the View menu and choose Show Transparency Grid, it's Shift-Control-D on Windows, Shift-Command-D, you can see the typical checkerboard. This only matters if you're going out to something transparent, like vector artwork into Premiere Pro or After Effects. It means nothing if you're going to the print world. This is a primary difference between the two. In the print world, you can hide something with a white color because it's the same color as the white paper. But in the transparent world, going out to video, transparent has to be transparent. So sometimes there's a little bit extra work you need to do. So I will turn that on and off just to work with it, to show you when I need to show you that. So if we go back and make this white again, white fill, and we look at transparency, now you can see we're dealing with multiple objects. Okay. So the selection tools, let's get in and look at making selections. If you grab the group selection tool and click on one of these, it looks very much the same as what we were looking at before. The difference here is if this was a group, I'm dragging this with the selection tool, selecting all of it and grouping this. Control G on Windows, Command G on the Mac. This is now grouped. So when I move it with the Move tool, it's grouped. If I select it with the Group Selection tool, although it's got group in the name, it's moving an individual object. This is useful so that you don't have to ungroup something to move it. Way back in the old days, you made a group, you wanted to change something, you had to ungroup it, select it, move it, and group it again. So a way to temporarily ungroup that. If I go to my Direct Selection tool, then you'll notice if I click in the middle, it's really essentially the same thing as the Group Select tool. The difference is if we don't have a fill on here, now I can't select this. And if I grab an edge, I'm only grabbing that edge. So typically somebody would go and grab the Group Selection tool, click on the edge and move it around. But if you use the regular Direct Selection tool, add the Alt key on Windows, Option on Mac, and click, now it's exactly the same. So, two tools that I will use, the Selection tool and the Direct Select tool, not the Group Direct Selection tool. The other reason that the Direct Selection tool is so important is for snapping. Now let's zoom in and look at snapping. When you are mousing over a corner, you'll see it tells me this is an anchor point. And if you've got snapping turned on here, snap to point, if I want this corner to line up with that corner, when I drag this into here, you'll see the arrow change. That means I have perfectly selected and dropped that in and lined those two corner points up. Absolutely guaranteed to 3 decimal points accuracy. I love this because I hate measuring and I don't like being inaccurate. If you follow these guidelines, you can get super accurate artwork without having to draw grids and guides, and I'll show you those in a second, and do all that math. I'm just moving and snapping and flipping and flopping and letting it fall where it's supposed to fall. And we can do that down here. So I'm now moving this to here, and we can snap that to that corner there. So now it's guaranteed to be snapped to that corner. Snap it to that corner. Okay, now I mentioned grids and guides. I'll show you that if you view the rulers, and rulers is Control R on Windows, Command R on the Mac, and these are lots of things. There we go, rulers, show rulers. And the rulers you can change from points, picas. Points and picas are from the printing world, inches, millimeters, centimeters measurements, and we're in pixels again because I'm dealing with the video world. I'll drag this down, and this is a guide. And if I wanted to, I could snap the guide to something that's already there. I can drag down unlimited guides. Drag guides out on the side if I want, and they don't have to be snapping to any object. I could be snapping that over to there, and I could be drawing things within that guide area. I know a lot of designers who, you open up their Illustrator artwork and there's guides and grids everywhere. That's great. That's what they want to use. If I need them, I'll use them. If I don't, then I'll get rid of them. If you right click on the document, you can choose to temporarily hide the guides, show the guides. Oops, let's show the grid. Show the guides. You can also unlock guides. So sometimes you need to move these guides around because when the guides are locked, you're not going to accidentally select them. So if you want to drag something into the corner, it intersects, and when I drag this over here, it's right between those guides, just like that. Okay, so and the guides can be anything. So watch this. I'm going to grab a star, drag a star up, and right-click on choose Make Guide. Now I have a star that's a guide. Any vector shape can be turned into a guide, released from a guide, deleted from the guide. I'm going to delete all my guides. So I'm going to go into the View, Guides, clear the guides. I don't want the guides right now. So let's talk a little bit more about the direct selection tool. So as I showed you before, I can click on a point and select it. If I do select a point and move it, then I can move that point. Or I can select 2 points, and the easiest way to do this is to drag around here, and now I'm moving those 2 points. If I hold the Shift key down and move it, I'll constrain it to a horizontal or 45-degree increment wherever you go. So that can be very, very accurate. Same with the bottom. We can drag that and move that around. And it's the same thing with an ellipse too. If I draw an ellipse and I'm holding the Shift key down to make sure it's a perfect circle, and I can grab this point and I can affect that. Same with this. We can grab both of these, and now I'm moving those middle shapes, the middle points around and positioning like that. So again, I don't have to measure anything. I don't have to draw out guides. I'm just using the keyboard shortcuts, Shift to constrain. And in the Edit menu, Preferences, in the Illustrator menu on the Mac, if you go to Smart Guides, you'll see a bunch of settings here of what will show up for guides. Alignments, object highlighting. If you don't like that, you can turn it off. The transform tools, anchors, paths, measurements, spacing guides. And I like to use these construction guides. I'll show you what these are in a second. And you have a choice of the angles, and you can create custom angles in here too. So I'll click OK and delete all this. And I'm going to create a square and make this one red. And I'm holding down the Alt key on Windows, Option on Mac, and you'll see the pointer turns to 2 arrows, which means that when I drag, they're going to duplicate. And you see the center is highlighted. So I've just moved this to the center and highlighted. I notice that I have a white stroke here, so I'm going to select both of these. And you can either go to our forward, backward controls here, or up here and turn no stroke on, or I could have done that over here on this side. So now that I have these selected, I'm going to select both of them, and if I move to the outside, you'll see this turns into a rotate cursor. If I move to the edge, I can resize these. If I move to the side, I can rotate these. If I hold the Shift key down, then I can rotate these on 45 or 90 degree increments. So now that I have this shape here, I can use some of the Pathfinder tools to work with these shapes. And I can also use the Shape Builder tool. So if I move the Shape Builder tool and drag down here, I've just made one solid shape. If I use the Alt key on Windows, Option on Mac, and click on one of these, like the middle, I will have made a hole. So let's go back to our transparency grid, and now I've got a hole. So if I didn't have to explain this, I've created this shape in seconds. Let's make this a little bit more interesting. I'm going to grab my Direct Select tool, and I can move this around because these are 2 separate shapes. I'm going to select, click in the middle, it selects all the points, and then let's zoom in, and it's going to snap. You see that change? It's now snapped perfectly into that spot, and it looks like a larger rectangle tool. But if I select this and hit the down arrow, with Shift, now I'm starting to create an interesting shape. Let me get rid of my rulers here. So that's one shape that I've created, a logo design shape. I'm going to select it with the Move tool, hold the Alt key down on Windows, Option on Mac, and Shift, and drag to the right. Add Shift after you start dragging it. So now I'm going to modify this. So that's my first design. Now let me find some, I'm just going to get some more room here, so I'll make these a bit smaller. Okay, so now I've got these shapes, and what I could do is select them all, and when you grab the Select tool, you have these round rectangle, rounded corner tools. So when every point is selected, you see each one is blue. If I click and drag on here, I'm going to round each one of them. Whoa, wait a minute. I went from that shape there to that shape there. Pretty cool. And again, if I didn't have to stop and explain it, I've created something pretty quick. All right, let's keep going. Again, I'll drag this over here this time, and get my tool and go back to square. And now I want to select individual points. So you'll notice that when I click on the point or click around the point, and here's a little tip that I have used for like 30 years. I always fear that if I try to click on a point, I might accidentally move it. So I tend to marquee select it. So I will drag around a point, or a multiple points. So I'm going to drag around the top point and then hold Shift and drag around the bottom point. And you'll see the top and the bottom are selected. So if I click and drag this, now I've got this kind of shape going on. Pretty cool. So within a matter of moments, we've created all of these shapes just with regular rectangles. No pen tool, no measurements, no guides, just doing this. But there's one thing that's bugging me now that I rounded this. It seems to end a little bit too quick. You can see that this ends here and this ends here. I would like this to continue along here. Now, one way to align this is to grab the pen tool. I said I wasn't going to use the pen tool, but I'll grab the pen tool. I'm holding the shift key down, which is aligning this on 45-degree increments. What you could do is take that and turn that into a guide. So make a guide, and that's now a guide. And now I could drag that down and it snaps. Okay, that's cool. Now I know it's absolutely snapped to that other bottom piece. It makes a little bit more of a cohesive design. Let me undo and I'll show you the way that I would do this. Instead, this only works if you have in your preferences the construction guides turned on. So watch this. I'm going to click, I'm going to zoom in so you can see this. I'm going to click here. By the way, with the direct select tool, you can click and drag any part of any path. I'm going to drag over near the end. I'm not dragging the point, because if I do, it'll just drag the point. I'll drag near the point. I'll drag over this anchor. And now when I go back over to this side, you'll see that it lines up. I'm not holding shift or anything down. I could hold shift down to go to here, but now I get that construction guide. And it seems like the construction guide wakes up when you mouse over it. So I'll show you that again over here. I'm going to drag this over here, wake that construction guide up, and then now drop that in. That might seem not like a big thing. Well, isn't drawing the guide, making the guide, and snapping to the guide, isn't that easy? Sure, it's easy, but it's click, click, make guide, snap. It's 3 extra steps. And if you do this all day long, if you can eliminate 3 extra steps for every time you snap, then it's going to be better. So let me zoom out and let's look at this. Look at that. Boom. 1, 2, 3 shapes just started to create just like that. All right. I want to explain what outline mode is. If I check this, you can see the shapes in outline mode. You can see that the edges aren't that clean. There's no aliasing going on. It's just the wireframe outline mode. And it's Control Y or on the Windows, Command Y on the Mac. And you can go back and forth between this. You gotta use this. Anytime that your artwork is confusing you and you're not sure if something is still there and it's working, you can go to outline mode, scratch your head. Okay, thank you. It just helps understand what's going on in there. Let's go up here and choose Pathfinder. I mentioned the Pathfinder tools, and I'll show you how they work. If you have multiple shapes, let's grab a rectangle. And by the way, I'm going to double click on my layer and I'm going to change this from light blue to black. And the reason being is we're able to see the outline while we're drawing a little bit easier. So let me create a couple of other shapes. Okay. So I've got 3 shapes, and if we go to the Pathfinder, you'll notice that there are shape modes. This one says unite, and it's going to do just that. It will unite all of these together. This one will minus the front, so you can see it cuts that out. This intersects. This tells me it only likes 2 objects. So if I select those 2 and intersect, it's going to work. And then the last one is exclude, and it excludes on the areas that overlap. Let's turn on our transparency grid. You can see that's not white, that's transparent. So that is a shape mode. You can Alt on click on Windows, Option click on the Mac, and create a compound shape. What's that? Well, let's do that. Alt, Option click. And now it looks like we've made one object just like before, but watch this. If I grab the direct select tool and move this around, I can update this shape after the fact. So if we go to our outline mode, you can see this is still 3 shapes, but the unite is a compound shape. The results when you print this out, or export this out are exactly the same, but you can change your mind after doing this. Oh, that's useful. And that's the same for the other ones too. So if we go to our exclude mode, Alt or Option, click on that, it looks like you've cut these holes out, but you haven't. And let's go to our transparency. So you can see this is cutting a hole, but it's not really cutting a hole. Here's the cool thing. Remember before I used Alt on Windows, Option on Mac, and click and drag to copy? I can copy this compound cutout shape while it's still a shape. Watch this. Alt, Option, drag, and I've just added a new shape. If we go to wireframe mode, there it is. It's just another shape. It's programmatically creating this combination of objects. That's pretty powerful. Now let's undo, get back to this, and talk about our Pathfinder effects. Pathfinder will divide, trim, merge, crop, outline, and minus back. So if I click here, it's going to divide these up. So if we look at these in pieces, they're all cut in pieces. At first glance, it doesn't look like they've done anything, but the lines in the rectangle go through the circles, so they're cutting it up. They divide that up into pieces. So let's go back to all of them, and this is trim. So this is, again, going to trim. This is going to trim the front out of the back. And you'll notice that some of these are the same as front minus back. Merge will do the same. This is crop, so it crops out of the top object. If you look at this tutorial on creating the focus chart, I've got an Illustrator tutorial where I rotated these shapes around, and then I created this rounded rectangle to crop everything else out. So you end up with just the shape inside. That's a cool one to clean up the artwork. You can create crazy stuff, put in a frame, and then it chops it out. But remember, I would always create a copy, and then I would trim the copy in case you always wanted the stuff, the original stuff, not chopped away. All right, where were we? On this one, and that one is the minus back. So it just minuses the stuff out that's on the back. So don't get that confused. Compound shapes. Don't get that confused with compound paths. And I'll show you what I mean. So I've got two shapes here. If I right click and choose Make Compound Path, it will put a hole in this. If I grab the Direct Select tool, click on that shape and move it around, you can see it looks kind of like that, but that's what a compound path is. In fact, if we type R, let's make this bigger, and we convert this R into outlines. So right now it's text, but if we create outlines, guess what that center is? Let me just change the color. If I grab that center, that's the exact same thing. That's actually how fonts are able to make a hole in a counterpart of that. It's actually a compound path. One little tip I'm going to throw in here, in case you've ever fought with a compound path, if you made a compound path and it ended up solid instead of a hole, in the window menu, look for Attributes and select the compound shape and change this order, either reverse that or that one, and it will make that hole. So that's in the Attributes. I know that's a lot to take in, but if you stop and think, everything I did was based on shapes and snapping. I didn't have to use the pen tool at all. Of Of course, you can use the pen tool and draw gorgeous artwork, amazing stuff. But with simple shapes and some simple tools that are already built into Illustrator to help you, like snapping and guides, you can create some very interesting artwork. All right. So there you go, guys. You wanted an in-depth? That's in-depth. I mean, I didn't even touch on appearance and transparency and all of that. So maybe we'll do that again in the future. But there's some ideas of working with shapes, creating some simple shapes in Illustrator, and hopefully you found that informative. If you're new to Video Revealed, take a moment and subscribe. You want to support us a little further, join us over on Patreon for as little as $1 a month. Till next time, I'm Colin Smith, and it's my job to get you looking your best.